What if I told you that the real Ollie never actually died and might still be somewhere in the factory? Now, I know that sounds crazy, but if we take a closer look at the evidence I found, there's actually a very strong case for it. Not only does it suggest that Ollie survived, but it also hints that he could play a major role in Chapter 5. Let's start by addressing the obvious. The prototype spent an extensive amount of time mimicking Ollie's voice, which initially led many to believe that Ollie was nothing more than a non-existent child created by the prototype as a way to deceive us and Poppy. However, this assumption didn't turn out to be correct. Ollie was, in fact, a real person, most likely a child, and based on everything we know so far, it seems as though he's long gone.
Was there ever an Ollie?
Yes, there was.
But that was a very long time ago.
It's also important to recognize a crucial pattern. The prototype tends to only mimic the voices of Playtime Co. employees, all of whom were killed during the Hour of Joy. This strongly suggests that anyone whose voice the prototype copies is already dead. So, if that's the case, why would Ollie be the one exception? To answer this, we need to break down all the hints we've been given. By carefully piecing them together, we can form a solid conclusion about Ollie's fate. Then we can examine why his potential survival even matters to the story. For a rather simple theory, if you go out of bounds in Chapter 3, you can actually discover an unreachable area labeled in developer text as Ollie's room. This strongly indicates that Ollie was an orphan living in play care before the factory shut down. And here's where things get really interesting. A VHS tape from Chapter 3 heavily implied that the orphans were not among the victims of the toy massacre. Later in Chapter 4, this was fully confirmed when Poppy informed us that the children are below in the labs. If this theory holds true, it would mean that Ollie is still alive, living alongside the other surviving orphans. But if that's the case, why would the prototype, out of all possible voices, specifically choose to mimic his? Well, it seems that the prototype can only mimic the voices of those he's spent significant time with, and this wouldn't be the first instance of him forming a close bond with a particular child. After all, he once secretly collaborated with an orphan named Theodore Graham Bell, working alongside him to escape the facility, communicating with him in secrecy while everyone else remained completely unaware. So perhaps Ollie and the prototype had also spent a great deal of time together at some point, making Ollie's voice the most convenient one to imitate. But what if the truth behind Ollie's fate isn't as simple as that? If you recall, during Chapter 3's first nightmare sequence, multiple radios were scattered across the never-ending hallways of Home Sweet Home, each revealing details about a deeply disturbing discovery at Elliot Ludwig's estate.
Local authorities report that the body of a young boy has been found on the estate of the late Elliot Ludwig, an esteemed toy maker and originator of the Playtime Company.
In the actual game, these gruesome details were primarily used to enhance the nightmare sequence's atmosphere, but the lore itself seems significant, and here's where things take a dark turn. I believe the deceased child mentioned in those radios was Ollie himself. At first, this may sound like a far-fetched theory, but there's actually a substantial amount of evidence supporting this idea. More importantly, it could explain how Ollie is still present in Playtime Co. during the events of the game. For starters, we need to look into the possibility that Elliot Ludwig and the prototype are one and the same. Now, I know that Chapter 4 might seem to contradict this idea.
I wish you were here, Dad. When you were running this place, you always knew what to say. I miss you.
This confirms that Poppy is Ludwig's daughter, but it's stated in the same tape that she hates the prototype. This should seemingly prove that Ludwig and the prototype are not the same entity, unless Poppy simply doesn't realize that they are. Now, some might argue that Poppy knew her father well enough to recognize that a kind and caring man like him couldn't possibly be the same person inhabiting the murderous prototype. However, we don't actually have concrete proof that Ludwig was as good-hearted as she might believe. In fact, there's some strongly unsettling evidence to suggest otherwise. The orientation notebook heavily implies that every Poppy doll sold back in 1950 was made using human parts, and Ludwig was very much alive at that time. It's hard to believe that he wasn't involved in such horrific practices, not to mention how suspicious it is that he had playcare built deep underground, hidden from plain sight. It raises the question, was Ludwig really the all-loving man that some believe him to be? Now, just because Ludwig might have been an evil figure, that doesn't necessarily mean he was incapable of being a decent father to Poppy. Consider the VHS tape from Chapter 4, the one where Ollie is heard comforting Poppy while she suffers from a traumatic episode. At this point, we still don't know whether the Ollie in that tape was the real one or simply the prototype imitating him, but if it was the prototype, and Ludwig is truly his identity, then this moment could prove that despite everything, he still genuinely cares about his daughter.
I'm here, Poppy. For you, I'll always be here.
This still leaves two major questions unanswered, though. If Ludwig, as the prototype, truly cares for Poppy, then why would he want to lock her inside a case? And if Ollie was the corpse found at Ludwig's home, wouldn't that mean he's officially dead? For the first mystery, there's a strong possibility that Ludwig was simply trying to protect his daughter. Yes, his speech at the end of Chapter 4 certainly gives off the vibe of a typical villainous monologue. However, there are moments where he doesn't seem purely evil, where his words feel more personal than anything, almost as if he's trying to justify his actions specifically to Poppy rather than to anyone else.
It's always been about you.
This suggests that beneath all of his terrifying actions, there may still be a lingering sense of fatherly care, a belief that keeping Poppy contained was in some twisted way for her own good. Not to mention that according to the orientation notebook, Poppy lived in her case while Ludwig was still a human, and it's literally Poppy's case that the prototype refers to as her home. Now, as for the possibility that Ollie isn't actually dead, let's take another look at the deceased child found at Ludwig's estate. A likely possibility is that the doctor, Harley Sawyer, was the one who planted this corpse in order to frame Ludwig. We already know that Ludwig and Sawyer had serious bad blood between them, stemming from the fact that Ludwig personally removed Sawyer from the Young Geniuses program. This could have been Sawyer's way of getting revenge by setting Ludwig up to take the fall for something he didn't actually do. Even if we assume Ludwig was a bad guy, which is the perspective we're following for this theory, it still doesn't really add up for him to have murdered a child. By the time Ludwig presumably became the prototype, he was already against the experimentation happening within Playtime Co., which is exactly why he orchestrated the Hour of Joy in the first place. Sure, he may have been involved in using human organs for the Poppy dolls back in the day, but at some point, his perspective shifted. This possible change of heart can actually be traced back to the letter Ludwig wrote when removing Sawyer from the program. In it, he mentioned that he had changed after truly seeing the world again. Of course, this doesn't explain why he had the Playcare built so deep underground, but that's a mystery for another time. Of course, Sawyer's main priority in life was science above all else. The corpse, who we had previously theorized could have been Ollie, was reported to be missing important components.
Organs, as well as key bones from the skeletal structure, were reported missing from the body. It is unknown at this time whether this extraction was, in fact, the cause of death.
These are the exact parts used to create the bigger body toys. This means Sawyer may have used Ollie not only as a means to frame Ludwig, but also as a test subject for some of his own twisted experiments at Playtime Co. And here's the most interesting part. If Ludwig truly is the prototype, he may not even be aware of what really happened to Ollie. This could explain why he simply assumes that Ollie is dead without considering any alternative possibilities. So, what was the point of unraveling all of this? Well, if this theory holds up, it's very possible that we'll actually encounter Ollie as a bigger body experiment in Chapter 5. He might even give us a rundown of his backstory, revealing the truth about what really happened, and from there, join us in the fight against the prototype. It makes sense as well. I mean, who would be okay with their voice being stolen and used without their permission? That alone could serve as his personal motivation to help us. If this is true, Ollie might become a third ally alongside Poppy and Kissy Missy, if they return, that is. Do you think the real Ollie is alive? Drop your theories in the comments. Also, check out this video here and subscribe.